Hello, everyone, and welcome back with the TSI Talks podcast. With me is Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Orco. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay, Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I'm the co-founder of Traptics. Traptics is a game development studio we started back at 2012. And my main role here is that of the game designer. We've been working with video games for all these years. We've been developing our own games and for other companies as well. And Homeseek is what we have been working exclusively on for the past 2.5 years.
Oh, okay. 2.5 years. So, as you can hear, it's about Homeseek. Homeseek is a survival strategy game and it's currently out on Steam. You can find the link in the description, and we are going to talk a little bit further into the podcast, obviously, also about the game, because it's our core component today. But first, I want to know, Mike, how did you and your team get into game development?
Um, so we got into game development a little bit, not very consciously. It was more of an accident, let's call it. Um, there was a competition 12 years ago about game ideas, and I had a game idea which I sent to the competition. And after the competition was over, we had a discussion with a few friends of mine that were into programming about whether we could do this into a video game. So we made a demo for it. We ran it on Kickstarter. And then we got some traction from other companies. They were impressed with what we did back then and started hiring us for outsourcing our services. And one thing brought to another, and this became a professional career. But we didn't ever say that, I'm gonna be a game developer. It's just something that happened over time slowly.
Okay. But it was a gradual process getting you eased into the game industry. So how long have you been developing games overall? You said Homeseek isn't your first project. You did it for other companies too. So I'm kind of curious what you did before Homeseek.
So before Homesick, through Traptics, we developed 4 games of our own design and over 40 games for other companies and individuals. The games overall weren't very popular or weren't very big. They were small, very small actually, indie projects. So I doubt you know any of them. Um, but effectively, there were different kind of projects. One was a puzzle game, another one was a tower defense, another one was a couch brawler kind of thing. So we're trying different things depending on what inspired us at any given moment.
Okay. And then what spurred on your decision to like go away from these smaller bite-sized projects to go into really the deep end and then make a game with Homeseek that is a survival strategy game in a extremely competitive market?
Yeah. We never had the chance before to reach our, let's say, our limits in terms of budget, scope, and in terms of how far can we take our own skills. And we always wanted to do like a big project, something that we don't cut corners in order to do it. And Homesick came into existence when the stars aligned, let's say, and we found the budget, we found a few opportunities, we found a project that is overall very enticing, and we decided to do it. It was a combination of situations, of circumstances that made it ideal for us to develop Homesick.
So it is safe to say that Homeseek is probably the project that is the most complex of all the projects you've done so far, right?
Yes, by far.
By far. So how did you go about designing it? Did you have actually a design document written up or something small like a few guidelines? Or did you just shoot from the hip and said, we are ready to go, we are doing this live?
We had plenty of time in pre-production to figure out exactly what we want to do in terms of gameplay, in terms of world building, and of course, Frostpunk was a thing when we were pre-designing this, and it was a main inspiration for us. But at the same time, we try to plan our own course and do things a little bit differently. The main inspirations for Homeseek was, of course, Frostpunk, as I mentioned, and then Mad Max, which back then were both very popular things. They still are, actually.
I mean, yeah, I would say. Frostpunk really, really is. I think together with They Are Billions, they are a bit different, but both kind of spurred on this like survival strategy thing. They Are Billions is more wave defense, and um, Frostpunk is more resource based. So your game obviously took more after Frostpunk. But what interests me, like the market, obviously, since you started with the game, you said 2.5 years, so a lot happened in that time, and I'm also pretty sure that a lot of these other projects got into development at the same time as yours. So, like I said, but
Indeed.
how do you feel about the current state of these survival strategy games in the market? Um, like for example, Endzone and what's another big one?
Surviving the
Uh,
aftermath and
yeah,
all
Surviving
that.
the Aftermath, exactly. Those were like the really big ones, the really successful ones. I mean, you probably didn't really know that there's like a barrage of them coming out, but did you like think at any point in your development that this would be the case and how to stand apart from the pack with your game?
Yeah, so a month after we committed to starting the project, Endzone came out, and a couple of months after, I think it was Surviving the Aftermath, or the other way around. So when we started, actually, it was only Frostpunk. And what Frostpunk did differently, and we wanted to actually follow on these footsteps, it was that it was really survival. It was, if you mess up, you die. It was very leaning. It was leaning very much on the survival aspect, and it was something that we wanted to borrow. While in other games like Endzone and Surviving the Aftermath and all the other strategy people know, the survival element is not so prominent. It's more something, if you completely mess up everything, then you might die, but it's not so aggressive. It's more like a regular city builder where you can expand your city exponentially. And so the importance of survival, we felt that it was still something that is setting us apart. And then there were other decisions that we had made, and we felt confident that they offer something different from the other games. So one thing is the emphasis on the story. So all of these games, they don't really have a campaign, they don't really have a story. It's more about and sandbox kind of gameplay. And we also wanted to try. Overall, we wanted to create a more tailored experience. So the levels are pre-designed, the story is pre-designed. There's a campaign going on, this kind of thing, which still, even after 2.5 years, it remains quite unique compared to the competition that we currently have. But truth is, currently we are noticing that people are very demanding of the genre. Frostpunk has set the bar very high, and it's very hard for anyone to compete with Frostpunk. And people actually seem to want more of the same. They seem to want more Frostpunk. They don't seem to want something different. And it's not just our game that is falling short of Frostpunk. I'm sure you've noticed maybe Floodlands or Gord that came out very recently, and we all face the same kind of unjustifiable comparison. Let's call it.
I mean, is this is just me now speaking, so don't take this as an attack or anything. But you set out. I don't think you wanted to copy Frostpunk at all, but you clearly said it was an inspiration. So
Yep.
how is like the comparison then to Frostpunk unfair from your perspective?
Um, from my perspective, it's unfair because Frostpunk is a multi-million-dollar project that has been out for 7 years. Not has been out, has been developed for 7 years and has had multiple updates. It went through early access. It got all the content over time, and it's supported by a very big company and so on. While we are a very small team with a very small kind of experience that is not, while it's inspired from Frostpunk, it's not trying to compete with Frostpunk. We have, uh, we are very aware that Frostpunk is, let's say, call it the best of the type of games that you can have. But we're trying to offer something different. We are, like I mentioned, the things, and it's not just if we can't, if the other companies can't compete, which are also big projects and also big companies. I mean, there would be no chance for us.
Yeah, I understand. So, what are some of the criticisms that you faced for your game?
Mm, from players, you mean, or from reviewers, because they kinda tend to be different.
I'd be interested actually in both because it's a good pulse check where reviews stand and where gamers stand.
So the reviews from the media have been overall quite positive. The lowest ratings we've received are sevens out of 10. So it's mostly seven, eights, maybe some nines here and there, but I'd say an average of 7.5. And they've been commenting well on the narrative of the game, on the survival aspect of the game. So what we were going after as designers, it seems to be there and seems to be commented positively. They draw some they have some problems with the UX at moments, which I can understand. It can be improved, and it is being improved. And sometimes they found it a little bit too hard, a little bit too difficult. I remember there was an article saying Homeseek is the Dark Souls of strategy games. Um, the difficulty has also been a little bit balanced over time, but as I mentioned, it remains a critical part of Homeseek. It is meant to be difficult. It is meant to be about survival. Now, on the player side, the same things that are being commented on the reviewer side, it's things that the players don't really enjoy. The most prominent kind of feedback, negative feedback we've had, is that the game feels too linear. They seem People seem to expect another sandbox like the other games where you can build everywhere. You have all the buildings, you have all the technologies, and you can go as big as far as you want. While the game is not trying to be that kind of thing. So we're trying to tell a story, through a narrative game. We do have an endless mode, but it's not the main selling of the point of the game. It's more like to have something extra after you're finished with the campaign. And we do have also an online multiplayer which serves the same purpose. Like I know everything about the story. Let me now pit my knowledge against the other players. So we are somewhat conflicted on how to handle this as a development team, because the very essence of the game seems to be what it's problematic for some players, and I have the feeling that we haven't managed to reach out to our actual player base, and we are kind of being misrepresented, like a strategy that we are actually not. So I hope this makes sense for you.
Yeah, it makes perfectly sense. I wouldn't say you're misrepresented as much as you're misunderstood, or
Yeah.
the game is misunderstood, because the only people who represent the game are you. And I think well, what happened here, this is just a little bit of feedback from me
Mhm.
as a player. um I had to dig into the game first as well, because I was kind of surprised on how it's structured, and that you're actually, like you said, you have a campaign, you want to tell a story, and that's all fine. It's just you just chose a very unusual format for it, this survival strategy game.
Yes.
And I think if somebody's hears survival strategy game, they have different associations with the genre. And I think this unusual approach is somewhat where you got caught up. Um, I don't read critics review, but hearing them saying it's like the Dark Souls of survival strategy games already like makes me cringe. It's just a hard game. Can we just call it a hard game, please? And I'm personally fine with the difficulty curve. I think it's completely great that you said this is supposed to be a challenge, and this is not supposed to be like kindergarten here. Yeah, and stay with that. I mean, you can rebalance it a little bit, but stay with that vision. I think that is one of the more endearing aspects of your game. I mean, the entire game is endearing, but I think that the core thing that needs to happen is like that the players wrap their hand around your that this is something that tries something different.
Yeah.
Different is not
And
always good, but in this case, it's good, at least from my perspective. Um,
You mentioned also that what you said about Dark Souls. Something that we feel that has done some damage on the image of the game is that the easiest way for us included, but mostly on the media, to explain what our game is that it's a combination of Frostpunk and Mad Max. So this comparison raises the bar very high when someone gets into the game about what he expects. And it's one of the lessons that we also got as a team, that we need to be more careful about how we market our game, because it can give the wrong kind of expectation. And a little something that it's very hard to prove, but we get the sense of, is that our art style, this realistic kind of art style that we go after, the cinematic that we have at the beginning, the overall sense of high production that you get from some things, um, also get in the way of raising the expectations beyond what we can, deliver on. The players expect things equivalent of Frostbank quality, and it's impossible for us to to compete on that part.
I mean, you can't compete on Frostpunk because budget alone, and probably also within team experience. I think your team is fairly new, and
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you said, also Frostpunk had like years and years and years and years of development as well. So there's like something lacking. But I agree with that take that you probably shouldn't have likened it to Frostpunk, or said it's a mixture between Frostpunk and Mad Max. I would have just actually stuck if I was in charge of the marketing and say it's Mad Max but a strategy game,
yeah. Mm.
something like that. um and especially what you also could do is like highlight that this is a campaign driven endeavor, not like this free sandbox mode thing that most people expect from these games. That this is really something different. This is a different experience, and it's a story driven experience as well. I think if you steer that ship in that direction, you can turn it around.
We are
Honestly,
trying actually,
yeah.
but at this point we don't know. We don't know what else to do. I mean, it's mentioned in the trailer. It's obvious on the page that it's story rich. It's campaign driven. We mentioned it in like so many things. But when every other game is a sandbox, players expect a sandbox. I mean, they're not even reading this stuff. So it's I don't know what else to do on that part.
I have to say that actually made me laugh. They don't read that stuff. Yeah, they don't. They absolutely don't. But at least you can tell them. At least you try to turn it around,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is a good thing. So, don't give up. I know at one point you have to cut your losses, whatever. But Homeseek is relatively fresh still. I think you still have time to turn it around a little bit. So looking a little bit into the success side of the game,
Hmm.
what I would like to hear from you is how successfully do you consider this game, and on two metrics actually. First, as a financial success or as a success with the community, and as a success for the studio creatively. Where do you stand there?
So financially, it's kind of early to tell. We haven't had the launch we were hoping for, but we have indications that it's not. This is turning around. So um, we remain confident that this can become a profitable project financially. So, but it still remains to be seen. We are discussing whether we should do consoles or not, and we are going to release on Epic on a couple of weeks. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that end. And in terms of touch with the community, it somewhat feels like we've dropped the ball. We've been trying very hard to engage with the community, and the community hasn't been as responsive as we expected. From this kind of games, we expect people would discuss strategies, would try to find things on how to go through difficult levels, and how to approach certain situations, and we haven't had the chance to see that. We are going to do some online multiplayer sessions where we play against the community in an effort to engage more with them and also showcase the online aspect of the game better. But we haven't had the chance actually to do some kind of community management before, so I'm not sure if we've done anything wrong or maybe we expected too much of the community. Um, Now, in terms of what the value is for the team, I think that's where the game shines. It displays very well what we can do as a team, both in terms of quality but also in terms of speed. As I mentioned, these kind of games that the competition develops has multiple times our team size. They have multiple times our budget. So they're very big projects, and I like to think that Homeseek stands its ground very adequately, very proudly. So I think it does a good job of displaying the team's potential.
Okay, that sounds actually good. So it's not it's getting there. It's just a slow start.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. So, is there anything in Homeseek where you say I'm particularly proud of that we have done it that way?
Um, the level design thing, every level is pre-designed. Um, Even though it's not something that the game is very popular of, as the game designer, I can appreciate some aspects of it that maybe are not, as obvious to the players. And overall, the thing that we are most proud of is the production value that we have created for the game in terms of graphics, content, these kind of things, given the budget and the timeline that we had. It's not something that is very apparent, to the non-game developers, or very important to the non-game developers. But it's what I've taken away, because this is a proof to us about what we can do next, and how we can take the best parts of what we learned from Homeseek and apply them to something better, newer, and so on.
Yeah, that's true. So when you, well, what's one lesson you took away from Homeseek actually?
It was what I said before about how you can have your product a little bit misunderstand it by creating false expectations, either by comparing it to other games or by the art style that you have. I was recently speaking with another game developer, a very successful one, and he was saying that he intentionally keeps expectations low by having more indie graphics, if you know. So we got a very realistic approach on our graphics, and realistic graphics usually mean AAA company or AA company or whatever. It means a big budget, stuff like that. So even by seeing a screenshot out of the game, you can start make presumptions about how it's going to be, and this is something I will more I will take into account more in the future about how the game feels in terms of production value, let's say. I want to over deliver on the expectations, not under deliver.
Yeah, I actually meant more from a game design point of view, where you just say, hey, this is a great thing to have in your video game.
From a game design view, I would go for less content with more replayability. So, while personally I enjoy very much the tailored experiences, which are more about having a one-time good experience than 20 mediocre ones. People seem to this seems to be a little bit thing of a past, so I would focus more on replayable, on finding ways to make the game more replayable than Homeseek perhaps is.
Okay, so one thing that I want to touch on is you said you're very proud of the map design or how the maps are designed, even if they don't concern or doesn't really concern the player all that much. So what I've experienced so far is that the maps are fairly small. I have played Homeseek for 2 hours. I enjoyed my time with it so far. I have to get back to it at one point and make a review about it still. So that's also coming up on this channel. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to us. The TSI, please, please, please hit the subscribe button down below. Going back to the interview, we what I found out is or what I thought, and this is where my Frostpunk comparison comes in, that the building space, because this is again more of a straight up builder Frostpunk, the building space is very limited, so you have to think about what you build where and how, and even have to tear down stuff and relocate it and whatnot. So this is a big aspect of Frostpunk, and I think your game goes into the same direction with those smaller maps, right? That was kind of the idea behind it. I haven't gotten that far, but I would like to have at least a confirmation if my thought process is right here.
Um, in our eyes and from our design perspective, it's entirely the opposite. So in Frostpunk, when you build a building, is there any thought process about where you're gonna place it? I mean, it's you just place it as close to the core as you can. There is no decision to be made there. Can we agree on that?
I mean, I think about it.
Well, you don't really have any options, yeah. It's you just place
I
it.
mean, I will relent to the fact that you don't really have any other options but to put it in to the core, but you still have to think how you kind of fill the rings in where to place what, I think. Where to
Okay.
place which building.
I-
Yeah, but from the perspective of the core, yes, you don't have any other options than to build it right next to the core.
In our case, you do have limited space, yes, but if you're running out of space, it's an indication that you probably haven't built the city correctly. At no point should the scenario reach a state where you don't have enough building space, because that means either that someone is placing the buildings inefficiently, or that he's building buildings that he doesn't actually need. So through limiting the building space, what we want to do is to make each placement of the buildings that the player does more impactful. So the player is supposed to plan ahead where he's going to place this big building that takes a lot of space, or if he has a big space which can support a big building and he fills it up with very small buildings, then he won't be able to place the building there. It's going to be placed much further, and then when he connects it, the distance plays a role for the connections, for the water loss and stuff like that. So the thought process throughout the design of Homeseek is that every building needs to matter about how it's going to be placed and where it's going to be placed, and I mean how it's going to connect, the rest of the city. So the distance plays a role, the different height levels play a role. I don't know if you've reached the second or the third level where we have different height levels. So all of these aspects should be taken into account when the player is placing the buildings. And it's actually one of the things that we feel that we've done very differently from the other kind of games. In most kind of games, you just place a building for the purposes of its functionality. Like, I want to get access to more housing, so they just place a house. Or in our case, this will later have to be connected with other buildings. The distance time and the traveling time between buildings plays a role. So all of these things become part of the process rather than just, being a visual representation of the functionality.
See? Those are the details I like to hear. Okay, so if you could go back, let's leave the marketing out for now,
Mhm.
because we talked about that. If we could change one thing about Homeseek, what would that be?
I would design one campaign instead of two, and I would try to find a way to make it more replayable and make it a little bit more randomly generated than pre-designed on certain aspects, not all the aspects.
Okay. So, how many
May, may,
people?
may,
Yeah,
Maybe also not do the online, because it's not something that we've seen people be very interested in.
I think online. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the online is the most superfluous component of the game, if I may say so.
Yeah, of course.
So if you or tell us a little bit about your, I say your company. How many people do you have employed? How many people are at the studio?
So on Homeseek, there was 5 of us that we started working on it. We developed it for a year and a half. At the same time, we also did some contracts for other companies. And after a year and a half, we signed with our publisher, the Iterative Collective, and we got some funds with which we managed to scale the team up to 13 people. Some of the people were on part-time basis, and a year after that we released Homesick. So during development there was a year and a half with 5 people, and then another year with 13 people, and the ones that were on contract basis are now not anymore on our team. So right now we are 80 people.
Yeah, so a really small studio.
Yeah, compared to
Still, I mean,
the other.
yeah, compared. I mean, there's like indie games are fairly scalable when it comes to the studio. A lot of people do contract work too, but still, Homeseek for such a small studio is a really good effort. I will say that. And I think you can be proud of what your team has achieved here. So
Yeah, we
that's
are.
something I will throw still out. Is there, before we switch a little bit, before we switch to the topic, because I really want to feel your pulse on some stuff that's happening in the gaming industry currently. Is there something you still want to tell us about Homeseek, about your studio, about yourself? You have free reins. You can do and tell people whatever you want.
Regarding Homesick, we are at a stage where we're trying to take as much of the feedback as we can and try to incorporate it. We've had, I think, like maybe 6 updates on the past 2 months on Homesick, and we are very active on finding ways to improve the game without completely changing its identity, of course. And we are also currently looking into what we are going to do next, and so we are kind of juggling in between different kind of things right now.
Okay. Check out Homeseek on Steam. Link is in the description of the interview. And at least wishlist it. So you help the dev out. Wishlisting is good. It's
Yes.
free. And it's probably the best thing you can do for any indie dev. Okay. Let's go into the games industry. Because I'm kind of curious your thought process on some things that are going on at the moment. So, uh, the last few weeks have been pretty tumultuous.
Yes.
I don't know what topics you've been following, but for example, I mean, we talked a little bit about Homeseek and profitability and stuff like that. So what shocked me, I heard the news yesterday. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but that Me, the developers of Shadow Tactics,
Yeah. The close.
Desperado 3, and Shadow Gambit, they're going to close down.
Yeah.
Despite uh,
Yes.
Sha- Shadow Tactics being actually very well received.
Yeah.
No reasons have, I mean, reasons have been given for the shutdown. They say they want to focus on personal things more. But do you think there's more in the background? Do you think they are shutting down because Shadow Tactics didn't make the money they needed to make?
Mm, are you referring to Shadow Tactics or the latest title? Shadow.
Yeah, Shadow Gambit. Sorry, Shadow
Shadow Gambit.
Gambit.
You know, I think Shadow Gambit seems to be doing great. I don't think they do it for financial reasons. I can relate to what they're saying about how this kind of projects can be very demanding, and whether you do well or whether you do bad, every game designer and every game developer, by the end of the project, he feels like he doesn't want to bother with his project anymore, because a player can play maybe what 100 hours, like 200 hours, and he will feel like he's seen absolutely everything on a game. The game developer has spent thousands of hours on every kind of game. His mind is, it's filled with this kind of thing. So I can totally respect and I can totally admire a developer saying, that this is my goal, this is where I draw the line, and then being able to move to his next thing, whether it's a new project or whether it's a new kind of business or whether he wants to completely change his field and wanna go be a farmer or whatever. I think it's very admirable to know what the goal is and sticking to it. This isn't a decision that came up after they released the game. I'm sure that they had said so, they had decided within themselves before doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. This is a decision that has been longer, or at least a discussion that has been longer on the table than we saw it. It just seems to come out of nowhere for most people, and I'm personally very sad. I understand them and I support their reasons for closing the studio. Absolutely, there is no discussion about that. But it still kind of makes me feel sad a little bit because their games are fantastic. So,
Yeah.
let me plug this real quick. And don't forget to check out Homeseek too. But check out Shadow Gambit too. It's a really good game. And they are from Germany. They are not far away from me. And it is actually a huge loss for the German gaming industry that they shut down, because I feel like, especially when it comes to Germany, we are not as represented in these kind of projects like Shadow Gambit that other nations are. We are more simulator guys because it's just us. Yeah, we do the farming simulator, we do everything. But this is something I will think is a loss for the German gaming industry. So yeah, it's very sad. Another question that I have, because it also came up, at least for a little bit, and I think you can already tell what I'm about to say. How do you feel about people saying Baldur's Gate 3 shouldn't be used as a template for future video games? Or you know the post, don't you?
So you mean in terms of what to expect?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean it's inevitable. The comparison that every game is going to have with Baldur's Gate is it's going to be inevitable, especially for the games that compete in the same price point. So every other RPG that launches now at $60 and it's 30 hours long, it feels short. It is going to have an issue, but at some point, even the players of Baldur's Gate will have enough of it and they're going to move to the next thing. They're going to seek out the next thing that is going to be relevant. So it is, let's say, an issue, but it's a short-term thing. It's not gonna last forever. People are still
Yeah.
going to buy their $60 games with 5 hours gameplay. These
I
kind of
I
things.
I think it's not as much as a time issue, because you can have bloated games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla that is like hundreds of hours long. I think what Baldur's Gate does right and sets it apart from the entirety of the pack is that it's hundreds of hours of meaningful content. That is what it does right. And I think this is something that we haven't seen in a while. There is games that did that, especially for older gamers. I just say Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, because they have hundreds of hours of gameplay too, and they also manage to make it meaningful. I do think it's a forgotten art, and a lot of people are rediscovering that. How do you feel about the entire debate on single player versus live service games and stuff like that? Because that's also a huge part factoring into this, because I feel like that a lot of people are, or a lot of gamers I should say, are sick of being like nickel and dimed when they play video games.
Yeah, this is something we everyone says, that I don't like this kind of thing. Why is this game like that? And it's not. It didn't launch very well. Stop pre-ordering games, but you know, it, it it doesn't change anything. People still buy these kind of things. The amount of people that don't like these kind of things, they tend to be much more vocal than the ones that do like them. And so at any point that something like this happens, someone gets the feeling that this game, for example, was very problematic on that kind of manner. Let me bring, for example, Cyberpunk. You remember how when it released, it was very bad and it was unoptimized and it had like a bunch of issues. But a few years later, you will see at the game it performs fine. It has no issues in terms of sales or whatever. They made their series, it's doing great. It's these small problems don't they are just small inconveniences for the big companies. They know how to pivot around them, they know how to control the narrative, and they know how to exploit the market in the most efficient way at any given moment. But what Baldur's Gate did, it's not easy for another company to do because they don't have the track record of the company that developed Baldur's Gate. Even if our company, for example, was developed the exact same game from the beginning, it wouldn't have performed the same way because they have a following. They know what to show to the players. They know what the players expect from them. So it's not a matter of comparing a completely different kind of game with this kind of game. It's a matter of delivering on the players' expectations for this specific kind of genre or gameplay or whatever. In my opinion, of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's just opinions here, so we don't argue about opinions. But is there something when you set out to make Homeseek where you said this is a trend I do not want to have in my game? Was there anything like that for you?
Yeah, the randomly generated content, the sandbox kind of content, which has been prevalent, especially in the indie games, due to the reason that they increase the playtime. But I'm of the opinion that it's not just playtime that you get out of the game. You actually it needs to be meaningful. It needs to offer something, a unique kind of perspective or a unique story, stuff like that. And over time, the RPGs were story based. They have decreased while you get more randomly generated open world exploration kind of games, which to me they always feel a little bit more generic and a little bit more of a time killer than actually something that one wants to do. And, Baldur's Gate, on the contrary, which is a very story-heavy game, or even Starfield, which is also something that is theoretically story-based, they seem to get their first share, out of the game industry, and maybe people are getting tired of the open world, randomly generated kind of gameplay.
They do. I feel like they do a lot. Um, I think the Ubisoft formula, as they call it, has really ran its course. And I think,
Hope.
yeah, hopefully, exactly. I'm with you on that one. Because this is like one of the banes, like microtransaction, like loot boxes and everything else, but they also ran their course at this point, I think. I haven't seen like a game with a lot of loot boxes in a while. And we all know that, especially now we come to the other side of the thing, Blizzard. I don't know how well you are informed about what's happening there, but do you like, because Blizzard is like this humongous entity in the video game industry, yeah? And we also see it with Volition to a lesser extent. They have been around long. They are just not as humongous as Blizzard. But do you think Blizzard is in a downward spiral caught at the moment? Because this is like, you know that Overwatch released on Steam, which speaks volumes, and that the community is less than impressed with Diablo 4.
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest. I was never a fan of Blizzard, and the only game that ever appealed to me it was Overwatch. I mean, out of their games that they have designed, it always felt to me like they were, their biggest product, World of Warcraft. It still stays the same. I mean, what it is, 20 years later. How long has it been? I don't even remember. And so they have a few games. They've had like maybe 5 games. Diablo, Overwatch. Yeah, let's say that have 5 games, and they keep milking them, with sequels and so on, so on.
It's 4. You have, yeah, it's four. They have four major franchises. They have Warcraft, and I count World of Warcraft among that. They have StarCraft, which they don't even touch anymore for some reason. They have Diablo, and now they have Overwatch. Those are their four
Yeah.
major moneymakers.
Yeah, they had
And
Heroes of
yeah,
the Storm, which they shut down. I mean, there isn't much to go around. I mean, it's like you got they have. I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea. I mean, I'm not gonna badmouth Blizzard. This is not gonna come. This is not gonna work well for me. But just, uh, it seems a little bit limited. They're not trying new things, and this industry is all about trying new things, experimenting, creating new stuff. You know.
I wish they would just create good stuff because they seemingly can't even do that anymore. But I'm also somebody who fell out with them after Diablo 3. So yeah, I've seen them being on a downward spiral since Diablo 3 essentially. That's long ago, very long ago.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And how do you feel about what happened to Volition?
So if I know this correctly, they just shut them down because I mean, they didn't. It's not like they weren't profitable or anything. They just changed their business, kind of thing. Is this correct?
No, no, no. So what happened is, you're familiar with the Saints Row series? Open world was kind of like first a GTA clone, then it became a GTA parody, at least with parts 4, 2, and 3. And they, like, last year, I think it was. I don't even remember when it was released. It was like completely a nothing burger. Um, they released a reboot of the Saints Row series, and they wanted to go a little bit back to the roots, but apparently the producers interfered, and they wanted something different, something for the modern generation. And Volition wanted to go back to the roots, to Saints Row 2, essentially. They wanted to make Saints Row 2.5, as they were. And yeah, they released Saints Row, the reboot, as it were, and it cost 100 million to make. And it was such a humongous flop that they had to shut them down.
Oh. I I,
Because
I think. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, because I think this is also an interesting dynamic, because I go back to our interview before that, and this is why I have a thought process when I bring all this up. Believe me, I'm not just picking random shit out of somewhere. Because you said you value, or at least you implied it. You didn't outright say it, but you implied that you really value the feedback of the community and the fans, and try to implement as much as you can. Um, without the game losing its identity.
Mm-hmm.
And from day one, since they revealed the new Saints Row, or the Saints Row reboot, people have been telling them it's a bad idea. Do not do the reboot in this way. Don't. And Volition went ahead and said, "Suck it, fans, we are doing it anyways."
Yeah, it's it's hard because I'm telling you that every time that you see like the community saying this kind of thing, it's probably a very small percentage of the bigger pie. And I expect from big companies like Volition and Blizzard and all these kind of companies that they have much more accurate data that can predict how a game will perform. Obviously, at some points they do they do not meet their expectations, but it seems to me for a company to develop something and for a random individually out of the company to be able to tell whether this is going to be a success or not and be correct, not just randomly to actually know it, it means that the company is all over the place. I mean, as I mentioned, these guys spend thousands of hours on each kind of game. By the time that they have announced it, they probably have burned maybe half their budget or whatever, and it shouldn't be accurately possible for someone that is outside of this entire loop to be able to predict how this is gonna go. Does that make sense?
It kind of makes sense, but if really even your core fan base, like people that have been in your server, that have in your Discord server, for example, that have been there for other projects, that you even called upon to playtest your new project in secret, tell you, guys, this is not a good idea what you're doing here. At what point do you stop and listen? At one point it is sensible feedback, and at what point is it a vocal minor? Because at what point becomes the minority the majority? Because obviously it didn't go over well. It really didn't with the majority. Otherwise, Volition would be still around, and Volition is. I mean, a lot of people say they deserve the shutdown. I wouldn't go that far. They have been an integral part of the gaming industry for 30 years. It's just a shame it has come to this. And I think a lot has to do also with Embracer not getting the money they need, because they're part of this huge Embracer group from Sweden thingy. But sometimes behind these, and this is probably a good takeaway, sometimes you should just listen to the apparent vocal minority, because there might be a majority behind it.
Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
is it is really sometimes just like that. It's the same on Steam. It's the same with Overwatch 2 and the Steam reviews. Um, is it really review bombing? I mean, yeah, it kinda is, but on the other hand, it's a entire community that can finally let out their frustration. And I am not surprised it has come to this, honestly, because if you do not give people an outlet to vent their frustration, at one point when they get one, it gets bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is like, this happens when people are, or when people feel unheard. Yeah, sometimes I get that some of the gamers can be extremely toxic, and they shouldn't be. But on the other hand, the game devs can be too. Not any I've interviewed, but I've seen stuff happening on the internet that is also not great.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion.
It can be, yeah. Game developers for sure can be problematic, but it's very hard. Being a game developer, it's very hard for some to see something that you've spent thousands of hours, or hundreds of thousands, or not hundreds of thousands of hours on, to see someone, just leave a negative review because I'm gonna bring the example of Armored Core. So the new game from Software, they have a relatively good score. I think 84%. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And the majority of the negative reviews is that this game is not Dark Souls. So this is just an example of how the game developer probably shouldn't hear to the community. It can work both ways, because at some point the gamer is not always right, nor the game developer, and this is where it's hard for you to estimate, it's hard for anyone to estimate whether the game is what is going to be successful or if it's not going to be successful, because the presentation of these things can be very distorted.
Yeah. It's true. By the way, harking also back to Homeseek and the difficulty, a lot of negative reviews on Armored Core 6 are also people who couldn't beat the first boss.
Oh, really?
Despite the game flat out telling them what to do. The first boss is a literal filter. From Software put a literal filter in that says, if you can't do this, you are fucked in our game.
Yeah, I mean, in all of their games, yeah. And I mean, I thought that Armored Core was supposed to be like super easy, in contrast with all the Dark Souls.
It has its own difficulties. I mean,
Okay.
it's not. I wouldn't say it's harder than Dark Souls, or easier than Dark Souls, but it has its own difficulty. It's a mech game. It has its own intricacies that you need to know, and it's very movement based, more so than Dark Souls ever will be. And it's, I mean, like I said, it's different strategies. I feel like it's not too easy, it's not too hard, it's just right, at least for me.
Yeah,
But
well, I would say to the players that if you are buying a game from Software, you should expect for it to be difficult. I wouldn't accept reviews like this is too difficult. This is their MO. This is their kind of games. I mean, they are difficult. People should expect that. People should demand this kind of thing from them. So when you see this kind of reviews, it's it's laughable.
it is certainly something. I mean, if I buy a From Software game, I expect From Software stuff, and also a difficulty curve involved in that case. I mean, it doesn't have to be super hard from the get-go, but I really want them to ramp it up during the game. And I mean, they like I said, first boss is a filter. It's nothing else. And if you can't beat it, you will not have fun in the game, because the boss basically requires everything to do you to do what you need to do to win. And that's the crazy thing about it. And this is also something that I see coming back more often. And there we can also come back to Homeseek, because why not? I love talking and how everything develops. We're talking about difficulty for a little bit. You obviously said, yeah, Homeseek is a more difficult game. We wanted to do that because that is also something we took away from Frostpunk. Why did you make the deliberate decision to make a difficult game in an age where a lot of people cry about the difficulty in video games?
Well, throughout the development of Homeseek, a main, let's say, thought that we have is that we need our game to be different from the other games. Okay, so every time that we could make a decision about whether we should follow on the steps of this kind of thing or whether we should try and do our own thing, we're trying to find ways and solutions in order to make it different. Of course, that different doesn't mean better. It's just, or worse. It just means different. So the main experience that we want to give through Homeseek is that of survival. Okay, so we couldn't have survival unless there was some difficulty involved, unless people would die, unless there was a possibility of losing. And therefore, from the beginning, the game was focused on the logic that if you do wrong moves, you will die. We won't handhold you and help you to come up with it. There are no comeback mechanics. It's very possible for you to enter into a spiral of death where you don't have citizens and you can't produce resources, and you don't have resources, therefore citizens die. And this is why we want players to play this more patiently. We expect from players to play this more patiently and plan their actions more than they do in other kind of strategy games.
I'm always fascinated by games that have the balls to let you, by your own mistakes, because you didn't pay attention or because you didn't read the instructions, let you slide into an unwinnable state. So I think Homeseek is that too, basically. As you said, yeah, you can spiral out of control. You can go into a death spiral. People just die if you don't, if you're not careful enough, if you don't strategize enough. I found it actually out when I was playing my first mission. That was funny. I was just building like stuff left, right, and center when I really didn't know what I was doing. And then suddenly people started dying, and I was like, what? Why? You have all this stuff you need. And then, yeah. And then I reapproached it and was more careful with when I put down a building and looked that people are more satisfied. and stuff like that. And see, it worked out.
Yeah. It was
Because
very common. Sorry, it was very common for people to get frustrated after losing once, and through this kind of games, it's expected for you to lose. I mean, the thing is that you're supposed to learn why you know, if you lose because you run out of water, just make sure that the next time you are more efficient about the water consumption. The mechanics of Homeseek and the citizens, why they die, they're pretty straightforward. So you just need for them to have water, food, and housing. That's just three things. So everything that the player does should be about keeping the balance in between these three things. It's simpler than other kind of games, to be honest. Just that the consequences of failing to delivering these things is more dire. Are more dire.
yeah, but like I said, I think a lot of I don't want to say newer gamers. I also don't want to say mainstream gamers, but I think a lot of people who play video games, let's say it that way, do want to play to win. As stupid as it sounds, and a lot of people throw in the towel after they lose once.
Yes.
I
True.
think that's a big problem in general. I'm not one of those people. I just do my thing, and that's it. And if I die, I die, and then I respawn and do it again, but differently. And at one point, I will win, and that's it. And yeah, but that's basically, I think, also a big issue, and why I do actually admire that Homeseek has a higher difficulty curve. That is something I really appreciate. I You don't see that very often these days, especially when you go into the AAA space.
Yes.
That's why Armored Core 6 is so refreshing too, or even Baldur's Gate 3, because I wouldn't call it a particularly difficult game, but the dice rolls are certainly not on your side sometimes. But that also goes or gives you some very fun interactions um, to do. So I think that like designing games with their own unique challenges and difficulties is something that is a lost art, where you just don't scale up numbers and then enemies become bullet sponges, for example, or damage sponges, but that, like, for example, if it comes to difficulty design, what always comes up to my mind are the Devil May Cry games. I don't know how familiar you are with them.
I don't remember them being particularly difficult. They were just hack and slash, yeah?
Nah, I wouldn't say that. If you want to look stylish by doing so and play them on higher difficulty, there is something to it. But the design approach of those like difficulty curves they have is different. Because, for example, you can they designed it in a way. For example, when you go normal difficulty, you have the normal setup as played, and if you go in on higher difficulties, you encounter different setups of enemies that give you a harder time, and you might encounter some enemies that are later on certain difficulties earlier in the game. So they
I see.
just don't crank up the numbers, they just don't adjust the numbers, so they change the entire setup of the game. And that's like really good design for me. At least I
Yeah,
think
that's
so.
interesting. I- Regarding difficulty, what I find very interesting and strange at the same time is the XCOM series. So I've been a fan of XCOM, but I also consider them a very hard kind of game. So you know, XCOM, Darkest Dungeon, these kind of games where you know you have permadeath and not even doing everything correctly means that you are going to succeed. I'm surprised how big of a fan base they and how loyal fan base they have. In an age where, as you said, everything is easy and everyone wants to win constantly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you ever played XCOM Terror from the Deep, Yeah, I'm going that far back. You know what difficulty is, because that game just like raw dogged you without even asking.
Yeah.
And it's legit one of the hardest strategy games out there. I by the way, I'm still waiting for a sequel on that. Can we have Terror from the Deep 2, please? Thank you. Yeah. Um it's yeah, but it's like something where this is something I really appreciate if people just take the time and design a good difficulty. Doesn't even need to be ultra hard just for the sake of being hard, but just throwing challenges at you where you have to think and utilize the mechanics appropriately. That's a good or that's I don't think it's a pet peeve, but a pet peeve of mine is more like I said earlier, is just cranking up numbers and then calling it a day. Like Call of Duty does that. They just give the enemies more health, and the
Yeah, that's annoying.
RNG and the RNG of them hitting you, like the hit scanner, is absurdly stupid.
Yeah, yeah. That's the worst when the difficulty is so high that you headshot the enemy and he just stays alive.
Yeah. Okay. I would suggest we can wrap it up here. Do you have any famous last words for the audience?
Just thank you for having me. It was very pleasant to have this discussion with you, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Also, buy Homeseek, link in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, the TSI, and check out our website, thestrategyinformer.com. Link is also in the description. And thank you for watching this time and for listening. And we will be back soon again. And I wish you all a good time. Bye bye.
Bye bye, guys.